Hello, friends. Lee C. Camp. You're listening to No Small Endeavor, and this is our unabridged interview with Sheryl Crow. Yes, I have to admit, I got into a little bit of fanboy with getting to interview Sheryl Crow. She agreed graciously to come over to our house and sit down in the living room where we taped this interview. And it was pretty special to get to sit down with Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Sheryl Crow. It was really a lovely interview and a lovely experience. And I think some quite remarkable things out of this interview, which I'll leave for you to judge. But I really quite enjoyed it. Enjoy. Here's Sheryl Crow. Sheryl Suzanne Crow, one of the great icons of American music, has had a career spanning over 3 decades. Sheryl has given us some of the most memorable songs of our time. Hits like All I Want to Do, If It Makes You Happy, and Soak Up the Sun. She's a 9-time Grammy Award winner, a recent Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee, and a trailblazing artist who's seamlessly blended rock, pop, country, and folk. Beyond music, she's a passionate advocate for causes close to her heart, from environmental sustainability to gun control to public media. She's also a dedicated mother, a cancer survivor, and a neighbor here in Nashville. Welcome, Sheryl.
Thanks for having me, Lee.
I'm delighted to have you here.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming to be with us.
It's nice to be here in your home. I love it.
It's great to have you here. Thanks so much for coming. I must say that when I texted to see about doing this in person, I gave the 2 options were us to come to you or you to come to me, and I thought surely if she wants to do it in person, she'll say come to me. And so, but nonetheless, here you are.
Thank you. I didn't have to vacuum or dust or anything.
When you think about, let me just start with a big picture question. Mm-hmm. When you think about your life as a whole, what are 1 or 2 things about your life that surprise you?
Well, one thing that I am reminded of every single day is that you start off who you uniquely are, and your whole life you're handed a whole ton of lessons to remind you of who you are. And now that I'm older, or shall I say wiser, as a 63-year-old, I feel more authentically myself as who I was when I was young than I ever have. More attached to my upbringing, more reminded of where I'm from. And I think it takes a lot of living to get to that point. I think one of the other things that surprises me is that no matter what the story you tell yourself about what your life is supposed to look like, you limit it. And that was something that I did not learn until I got diagnosed with breast cancer. That, you can carry this picture of what life is supposed to look like based on, how you were brought up or whatever. But that can be so limiting. And, by the time my kids came along, I had been to almost every country I could think of. And that's the kind of thing that you could not imagine. And I do, I do, in my woo-woo way, I have to give it up to, God for a lot of the lessons that I've learned, that you don't get the lessons until the second you get them. And he must have a great sense of humor, or she must have a great sense of humor.
That's your first comment about, in effect, coming back to yourself. Mm-hmm. That resonates very deeply with me, because I have thought about that in similar terms. I'm 5 years behind you. I'm 58.
You're a baby.
But I think that, similar for myself, I think that there are ways in which there's still certain things about my childhood that I'll mention here in a minute, because it's going to lead to another question for you, that I still probably haven't quite processed yet. But I think in so many ways, as I've gotten more at ease with myself, my being more at ease with myself looks more like I was in certain ways as a kid.
Yes.
Isn't that fascinating?
It is fascinating. And I wish, people will ask me in interviews, what advice would you give to your young self? And I always think there's nothing I could tell my young self that I could have learned in that moment.
Yeah.
So much of what you learn in your life can only intrinsically be digested based on processing, of letting go of those stories and of letting go of attachments, and also taking your interpretation out of your own memories. And, the mind is such an incredible, it's like AI, it's constantly learning and unlearning and undoing and redoing. And it's, and sometimes it's not for the best, That's why I find meditation to be for me, a necessity, because with an overactive mind that wants to interpret everything with certain meanings, I have to figure out ways to be quiet and just observe. And
yeah, I want to ask you about meditation as well here in a bit. But before we go there, say more about working out of, releasing, letting go of certain interpretations of our own memories, interpretations of our own stories. What's that look like for you?
It is funny. I took my kids to see In and Out. They were little at the time. That's that animated movie. I think Pete Docter did it. And they were bored to tears. They were bored with an animated movie. I couldn't believe it. And I was like practically crying. And it really, the whole thing is, it's a movie that I think probably is more effective for adults. But it talks about how a memory can be pure because it's very recent. But the longer you live, how you see that memory is based on how you see yourself and what woundings you have, or, they get sort of tinted through different lenses. And I think that's true. I think, I've been very open with my struggles with mental, I don't want to say mental illness, I would say mental challenges, largely genetic, and have had the good fortune of being able to get therapy through the years. And what we learn about ourselves is that a lot of what we tell ourselves is not based in an actual experience. It's based on a sort of mythology. I can look at my mom when I was, 8 years old and feel like she was really sad. And so I would assign myself the role of being the entertainer. I was funny, I was cute, I was smart, I could play the piano by ear, I could do all these things, shucking and jiving. And when she would smile, then that was love, And you assign yourself these roles at a young age based on a mythology that you tell yourself that isn't real. You're talking about a 30-year-old woman who has 4 children and a husband, and that is a lot. I'm a single mom with 2 kids. And by 8 o'clock at night, I'm like, I cannot wait to be asleep in my bed, So it's like, that doesn't necessarily mean that my mom was depressed. It might have meant she was tired or having a bad day one day. And I chose that to be, the story of my life. And that's what we do as humans. We're very, as little people, we decide what our role is, and so, I look at that and I go, yeah, that's why I'm famous.
Yeah.
Because if I could be great, then people would love me, right? So then you realize, wait, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. That notion of interrogating the stories that we tell ourselves is another thing I've been ruminating on lately. And I've kind of set for myself at some point, I've done some of this work through the years, but I think that it would be a really fascinating experiment for us to have some sort of way to go through our memories and really interrogate the stories we tell ourselves about those memories, and then actually do some work of talking to other people involved in those stories and ask them if they think our interpretation of that is true.
Yeah. It is fascinating. We were talking about this. So I have 3 siblings, and some of our memories are so different to each other. And my older sister is 2 years older than me, actually. She has memories that I have no recollection of at all. So it's such a, and I find also as I get older, I unless I look at I see a picture, I have less memories, So I think all that to say, we were talking about the power of the moment. When you talk about the word forever is every single moment. And being in that moment and, looking around and going, I'm going to be present in this moment. Yeah. Harder said than done, obviously, but. Yeah.
So, quick questions about childhood. Raised in Missouri.
Raised in Missouri, small town, Kennett.
And Sophie Byard, one of our producers, said she was just driving through Kennett this weekend and saw the big sign, home of Sheryl Crow.
I know. And it said hometown of Sheryl Crow, 2 words. So they did manage to correct that, which I loved. I was like, oh, you should leave it the way it was. But I do. I mean, I love my hometown. It's very flat, tornado central, cotton fields, churches. We had one high school, one junior high, two elementary schools. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody went to school with everybody. Moms had bridge club on Tuesday nights. That's when they came home on Wednesday, and you were in trouble because they heard all the gossip, So pretty simple living.
Yeah.
I also grew up. I'm older enough than you that I actually remember Vietnam. I remember being a young kid in Walter Cronkite, the nightly news right after dinner, and the names of the POWs. And I was, I think, in junior high when all of us wore POW bracelets. So, I mean, I try to talk to my kid. My kids are like, Mom, you were born in the 1870s, and I was like, yes, and we spanked back then. So, but, it does give you a certain amount of, I don't know, it gives you some levity if you grew up before things were as technical and as removed, to have newspapers and to have only a little bit of news and to sit around a table or listen to your parents talking and stuff. It was definitely quite a different time.
Is that your earliest political memory, seeing stories about the Vietnam War?
That, and my dad was a young attorney, and he had a case in the county right next to ours where he defended the county. Actually, there was a case of ballot box stuffing. So it was a correct
case about what?
Ballot box stuffing. They had been stuffing the ballot box with some dead people's names. And I think he was on the side of defending the county against the wrongdoers. And so we had death threats. And I was in third grade, and I just remember my dad coming down one night because I heard my parents talking about 2 a.m. My dad was sitting on the couch with a rifle and thinking, well, that's just very odd, and having to go to school in the morning with police. And,
wow.
So I do remember the discussions about, things that were bigger than right and wrong, like, more grand scale. So my dad was very, very Atticus Finch.
Huh. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
What's your earliest music memory?
My mom was, and actually still is, even though she's now battling dementia. Music is fascinating. She still has her instrument. She's an incredible singer. Was always an amazing singer, like operatic, just incredible. Sang in the church choir. But one of my earliest memories was singing for the Wednesday Music Club with my sisters, doing music programs with my mom. And so, and also playing by ear. I can remember we all took piano lessons. We had 6 pianos in our house because my mom taught. And
6 pianos in your house?
Yeah, she taught this method, not the Kadai method, I can't even remember the name of it, but where they had group piano lessons.
Oh, okay.
So we had one room that had 4 pianos in it, and we'd all be practicing, and my mom would be in the kitchen like, Kathy, that's a B flat. Cheryl, that's James Taylor,
That's fascinating. What's your earliest hymn memory?
I grew up in the Presbyterian church. Our church was very stoic, and my grandmother played
organ heavy.
Very organ heavy. My grandmother was the organist. My grandmother always had this funny saying. She referred to the Presbyterians as the frozen chosen. I have one favorite hymn, and I can't think of the name of it. Anyway.
Keep going. Let's figure it out, what it is. With me, Lord, thou and thou only first in my heart. Waking or sleeping, my presence thine. Be thou my vision.
Be thou my vision. Bing, 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 bing. That's it. Be thou my vision. Yes. Oh,
what a great one.
Yeah. And I will say, we every Christmas Eve, We all sang in the Christmas Eve choir, and our choir was quite wonderful. But my mom would always sing. She'd always sing the Lord's Prayer and "Oh Holy Night," and I mean, so every Christmas Eve, we have to play that. My mom's singing "Oh Holy Night."
The Lord's Prayer, was that the common version of how does it go?
Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
Yeah.
Thy kingdom come, thy will be done.
Lovely.
Yes.
So, last kind of question about childhood. I'm interested in, and I alluded to this a moment ago. Mm-hmm. So I had this dream last night. It was not a dream about you. It was a dream about a context. It was a weird context in which I was highly uncomfortable. And I woke up this morning, I started journaling about it, and after I dug on it a little bit, I realized, that's about this unresolved childhood, actually more adolescent, early 20s experience that I have not settled yet. And it was just interesting to me that I think we can do a lot of work on ourselves, but still some things can just stay with us a long, long time.
Yeah.
And I'm here in this particular case, I'm thinking about something that was 30, 40 years, and just because I'm about to ask you to be vulnerable, I'll say what it was for me was that I have carried with me a sense that the church of my childhood that was highly formative and loved me as a child, by the time I started getting education, theological education, I felt like they rejected me.
Oh my.
And so I realized in that dream, I'm still processing that. I thought I had processed that, but I'm still processing that. So, to whatever degree you would want to share, and you may or may not have anything like that, but do you have any kind of things you feel like still you carry with you that you've not yet sufficiently processed?
Oh, I mean, there are always things that I come back to. It's interesting. Religion it's such a through thread in my life because I've been through a lot of different experiences that mostly stemmed from fear, being scared into believing a certain way or being shamed into believing a certain way. But one thing two things actually, the shame that I felt when I used to, I was a young school teacher. I was also singing in a cover band. And I was part of a ministry at an evangelical church in St. Louis called Grace Christian. And I was, I wouldn't say I was, I don't know. I felt like I was really scorned when it was, passed around our prison ministry that we did that I would drink beer. I mean, I never got drunk, but, I was like, I enjoyed a beer or two. And I was suddenly not invited to do anything anymore. And that has come up for me. And that was one of my first experiences where I had to make peace with knowing who I am in my faith, not who other people believe me to be in my faith. Because I encounter that every day now, and I encountered it throughout my life, and I think we all encounter it in one way or another. And especially now, I think people judge you on who they believe you are and who they believe you should be based on their fear. And that has been something I've struggled with, and it seems to be the same in every story. A situation that I had with my dad where the same body reaction of shame and fear and sadness and less thanness. I mean, I think we have those all the way through our lives, but that one always stuck out for me because my relationship to the church mattered to me so much. And I think largely because of ego, of wanting to be seen as somebody who was on fire. And it was such an odd thing to be discarded when really I felt like, but wait a minute, I'm a good person, and I'm delivering for the Lord, and I don't think the Lord would probably care if I have a beer or two now and again, So, and that was my own thing.
Yeah, it's amazing, I think, the way in which experiences of shame, the experience of shame, I think, can be proportionate to or grossly disproportionate to whatever triggers it. But the powerful experience of shame linked up with that fear that you're talking about, it's just like that stuff just sears stuff in us, and it just takes a long time.
It does. And, people always talk about, especially if you go through therapy. Have you ever done EMDR? Okay, yeah. So you basically pick out a memory and you process that. And I think there are early woundings that seem so monumental that, like you're talking about, what did it feel like to the other person? I can remember my mom slapping me in a department store once across the face. Now, parenting was different back then, obviously. For me, pointing out somebody who was in a wheelchair. I'd never seen that before. And I'm sure my mom was probably having a bad day, but who knows? I carried that around with me. But my mom didn't carry it around. My mom loved me, and that was done, and that was a moment. And there are those moments in your life that you become a part of the fabric of who you deem you are, that you have to unravel the rest of your life.
Right.
And it can just be a moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you interpret that as being whether you're worthy of being seen as good again or being loved. I mean, I tell my kids all the time, living is hard work, but it can be beautiful and joyful, but not without feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. The craft of music making. You've talked at some point about playing music as something like a divine experience. That when you get beyond ego, that there's something very deep and transcendent that happens. Describe that for us when it's at that kind of place for you. What's that like?
Well, it's metaphysical. In fact, I think it's specifically physical. I remember meeting Carlos Santana and him saying he'd been in the audience, he'd watched me play, and that I really moved the molecules, and and which I loved. Hey, I'll take it. You know what I mean? And I think there's something to that definition where you're talking about molecules. They did that study years ago about how the shape of the cell, when you're stressed out, the shape of your cells changes. When you're relaxed or when you're inspired, they are very round. When you're laughing, they're very round. And so I do think that music is a molecular experience that can be shared at the spirit level if you're in a room and everyone is experienced being elevated. Phones have robbed us of that quite a lot. We sort of now our ego needs to document that we were in the room, being elevated. Right. But for me, there is the thing of walking into a studio with nothing and walking out with a piece of art that you didn't know was in you, and the wonder of where did that come from. There are some songs that you craft that you go, okay, that line is terrible, or that, or this whole song sucks. Then there are those songs that you go, I have no idea where that came from. That is not even something that would naturally come from my brain. And I only have a few of those songs. Redemption Day was one. Weather Channel. There are songs that when I step away from them, I'm in awe of the fact that I got to be in the room when it came, And I do really define inspiration as God, whether people like that or not. When you separate ego and you are locked in to spirit, which is, to me, the essence that exists in all beings. It's the molecular substance that we all are made of and that connect all of us, that make a song make us feel seen or heard. That is supernatural.
Yeah.
and I definitely do not take it lightly. You know, I got to be on the road with Michael Jackson, who was a very flawed person, but I got to watch him in his divinity and in his ego every single night. And you could see and feel the difference of somebody who was tapping into something or somebody who was very much tied to the here and now in his flaws, his ego. And we all have both. We all have both in us at all times. So that for me is why art is so powerful.
There is something about. I think this room used to be arranged differently, and I'm flashing back to writing a passage on the second book I wrote, and I was writing right here, and I remember having some sort of something happen in some particular passage, and it was a sort of joyous moment, and I just started laughing from the belly.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't funny. It wasn't a funny insight, but I was laughing because I thought it is so amazing to get to kind of be a vessel of some sort of creativity that comes from beyond us, I think.
There's no way to define inspiration except to say that it is divine and that it doesn't necessarily come that often. But when it does, you recognize it.
Yeah.
And you're humbled, or at least that's my experience.
Yeah. What's a song or two that you're especially proud of that has not gotten as much as attention as you would have liked?
Actually, there's a song that during COVID we did a documentary, and I wound up writing a song that was largely for my kids. The song Forever, and ironically, talking about forever, it talks about that. It talks about the letting go of the being present, of not hanging on to the moments, but being able to have the moments, but not have them define you. And the documentary I think got seen quite a lot, but songs like that. And I will say, for better or for worse, you do as you get older. I find I'm writing stuff that matters to me more, but that has far less chance of ever being heard because of the way not only the industry works, but everything is so much more geared to streaming and to being young, you know. But that's one song, It's Only Love, which came off the third record, was one. I have a lot of deep songs that really meant a lot to me personally. But songs like All I Want to Do or A Change Would Do You, all those songs that got played at radio are what give you permission to write the deep cuts. You know what I mean? Right. And you hope, and I'm philosophical about it. I do feel like music, just like every piece of art, it has a way of finding its place to the experience it's supposed to be a reminder to. If that makes any sense. Like, I know there are people that will mention songs that I go, oh my God, I forgot I even wrote that song. And you just go, well, that song must have found its way to that person for a reason.
Yeah.
So
when you think about, 3 decades now doing this kind of work and the hard work entailed in that, the commitment to it, what are some of the trade-offs you've had to make to do what you've done so well in your chosen career?
Well, I talked about that picture that you have and you carry with you about you're going to get married when you get out of school and you're going to have kids. And my parents are still alive. They're 93 and 88 and they're still married. And they were happy, except for obviously every marriage is filled with, hey, we're two separate people, but they did really well and still do really well. So that's, they sort of amplify to me that's what you're supposed to have, right? Well, I wound up traveling around the world and playing music. And so I didn't wind up I turned 40 and I suddenly am looking at my life going, okay, I'm 40, and what's on radio is like 17-year-old girls wearing school outfits, playing some pop songs, and I haven't had children yet. And, it's like, what is happening here? So, I guess a trade-off would have been, I didn't settle down. It's a lot to ask a partner, a man, to want to be in a relationship with somebody who's collecting frequent flyer miles by going to Israel or to Colombia or Bogota or to Tokyo I've played in Russia. I've been so absolutely, unbelievably blessed in my life. But the picture's different, and my kids came to me, and I believe they did pick me and they picked this life, but I was 44 and 48. And they picked each other for sure, my two boys. So is it a trade-off? I don't know. I put up with a lot as a woman. I had to fight for everything I got. I would love to say that it wasn't like that or it isn't like that, but it just is,
Do you feel
but
like
I don't know that what did I trade? I guess I traded a conventional marriage, but I've had people I've really loved who've loved me. And so I don't know if I was cut out to be married anyway, I personally am not sure how anybody's cut out to be married. That's my personal, I think, if you're a growing human being that wants to constantly be evolving, it's hard. It must be hard and challenging.
Yeah. It's not for the faint of heart, for sure.
Yeah.
But neither is raising kids.
Yeah.
And neither.
Best job I've ever had,
Yeah.
though.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's wonderful. Yeah.
Yes.
A number of years ago, I understand that you bought a small church and restored it and put it on your farm here in Nashville.
I did. I always said, if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
But he hasn't come yet. I've had several people who've gotten married in there. It just hasn't been me.
What do you think that symbolizes for you, that you bought a small church and restored it and put it on your farm?
Oh my goodness. You know what? If there are past lives, I feel certain I was a tortured nun or something. I don't know. But, I have a funny relationship with my faith, and I'm still learning about it. And it has defined me and it has shaped me. And I found this little church. I actually found it on eBay, believe it or not. And I went out calling this guy, and he was selling it through a realtor on the side for $5,000.
Wow.
Yeah, so I had somebody that was working on my barn at the time drive over to South Carolina and look at it, and it was super dilapidated and lots of bug rot, and we salvaged some of it and brought it back and built a little chapel. And I built it because I wanted a place that felt inspiring, that didn't that had nothing to do with my work inspiration. Work for me is inspiring, but it's also work.
Yeah.
And I've always treated it as work. Like, I didn't get into being a songwriter or a musician because I wanted to be famous. I really wanted to be great, which is in and of itself a torturous plight. You'll never be great when you measure yourself against other people who've ever done it. I don't even know what great is, but having grown up at a time when most of it was in magazines or on TV on, Dick Clark, or, you didn't see musicians all the time. You had to drive to Memphis to see them, or you got to see, there was no MTV, there was no YouTube, there was nothing like that. It was magazines and album covers and artwork. And so it was very mystical, and I wanted to make music that made other people feel like what I felt like when I listened to James Taylor or Carole King or Stevie Wonder or Mahalia Jackson or Aretha. And so I put that little church there because I just felt like I want to feel spirit, but I don't want it to be tied to anything other than just spirit.
So one way I guess we could summarize one of the things you pointed to there is this sort of tension between ambition and excellence.
Yes. Yes.
And then earlier you said at least twice that we have this desire to be seen and heard, which probably the seen and heard could fall into either one of those buckets, ambition or excellence, right? Let me make it a question instead of a statement.
You are so good. Carry on. I can't wait to see where this is going.
So my question is, as you've done your work, right, in what ways have you seen being seen and heard as this sort of healthy spirit? This is what it means to be human. And in what ways has the seen and heard been this sort of destructive ambition?
Yeah. It's so interesting. I think that no matter what, we all have a giant hole we're trying to fill. Why do we have that? I don't know. There is from the minute you're born, there's imprinting, right? So it's like we have horses. So you do this thing imprinting where you're constantly touching them. You're diffusing any kind of like hysteria or fear or whatever. So as parents, we are imprinting on our kids. We give them words and we give them parameters, and we also model to them. But then you also put in birth order. So if you're the second kid or the third kid, and are you getting as much? Are you being so? There's so much that goes into becoming an adult, and we would all be so amazingly perfect if we weren't raised by people, So this is always the dilemma. So then I think largely, particularly for people who are artists, and I think if you asked almost anybody who carves their reality around going out and trying to stand in front of tens of thousands of people, to lift their voice out into it and to be seen and noticed and to connect. I mean, I think the connecting part is what's so essential, that the hole is never filled. Because what is it supposed to feel like? And if we were all driven by love, the world would be such a different place. But I think we are largely driven by what we think love is supposed to feel like. And we're constantly working on that. That's why I think for me, meditation has been essential, because I've had to unlearn and I've had to relearn and I've had to just shut the heck up, because a lot of you go into analyzing every moment of your life and every experience. And sometimes you actually miss out on what the lesson is, and you can only learn it by listening. And I think growing up praying, I walked through every day of my life as a kid, and even particularly as a young adult, saying Jesus' name. It was like a mantra, but this is way before I started meditating. Jesus was my life buoy, and that is all great. But at a certain point, you have to stop and listen. I think it took a long time for me to realize that God was trying to tell me a lot of things, but I was too busy worshiping and asking for things to actually listen enough to be still, to look around and notice what was already in front of me. And that is for me, a daily experience of quietening my endorphins and just observing and being present and asking, where can I be useful? Because I think at a certain point in your life, you can do. You can accrue money, or you can accrue debt, or you can have great relationships, or you can have relationships fall apart. Whatever is part of the living part of living. But you do eventually get to the point where you ask yourself, what does this mean? And where is it that I can fulfill? At least that's my experience.
Yeah. Thank you. So I heard you say somewhere, I don't know where I saw this or heard this, that the move to Nashville from LA probably saved your life. Did you say something like that?
Yes. Actually, I probably said, which happened right before, I think having breast cancer saved my life. Because I think I had perfected being the ultimate caretaker of all people, of everything, the people pleaser of the world. And I was at the bottom of the list of people that I took care of. And I was engaged in a relationship that was super challenging and slightly toxic to an atheist. I just was really in not a great place, and I got diagnosed with breast cancer. I knew I wasn't going to die, but it definitely got my attention. And I had a very stoic radiologist who reminded me of my cigarette, beer drinking grandmother, who was a newspaper editor. Very, I don't know. Anyway, she said, I hope you get the tailor-made lesson that each cancer survivor gets. And I thought, how interesting. And I did. I realized laying on the radiation table that my lesson was to start putting myself first. Learn to say no. Learn to allow other people to, because one of the things that's interesting, talking about the metaphysical, a lot of people in the woo-woo world believe that left breast cancer has to do with nurture, because it's the feminine side, right side's the masculine. Women who don't allow other people to nurture them. So, we bring children in, we nurture them on the breast, we nourish, and then we put ourselves at the bottom. And so that really was a moment. And there was a moment where, while I was going through cancer treatment, there were paparazzi shooting into my house in LA. And I just decided, where do I have people? My sister lived here. I knew Amy. I knew Emmy Lou. I knew Vince a little bit. And my family all lived 3 hours. And there was an airport. And I thought, you know what? I'm moving to Nashville. And I did. And within a year, my first baby came. I think I was here 2 weeks when Vince Gill called me and said, hey, buddy. Just like that. Hey, buddy, get your guitar and come down. We're raising money for, I can't remember what it was. It was my first guitar pull ever.
Really?
Yes. Emmy Lou had a baby shower for me when my baby came. And that's really when my essential life began. And when I say that, I mean based in essence, based in who I was for the biggest part of my early life, which was roots, community, church, family. LA just was a stopping point for 23 years where I dumped my luggage, did my laundry, and got back on the bus.
Yeah. You've mentioned meditation a couple of times and alluded to depression. Can we spend a little bit of time unpacking that a little bit?
Sure.
We've talked about depression on this show a number of times. For one, I've had my own episodes with it. But so what would you say you've learned about how to do meditation and or how it's been of help to you?
Well, I think, I've had several moments in my life that were felt insurmountable. Now, because I grew up as a Christian, I would never have killed myself. A, because I didn't want to go to hell. That's what I believed. And B, because I didn't want everybody else's lives to be ruined. Like, I really didn't factor into my own, you'll feel so much happier if you get to go to heaven. It was like, no, I don't want to ruin everybody else's lives. Miss Caretaker here. But the reality of not wanting to get up and live and being mad at God that I would wake up, praying at night, I don't want to wake up, and then waking up and being mad, I did ultimately go to, I went to an ashram in the Catskills and took a vow of silence for 6 days, and that was very enlightening. But it was really after that I went and studied with a woman named Sharon Salzberg in Boston, who's written books on meditation, mindfulness. She wrote a book called Faith. She's brilliant, and I loved. In fact, she probably doesn't remember me. I mean, I was a no one, but I was blessed that I wound up on her floor, and she taught me the art or the practice of mindfulness meditation, and it is a practice. It's not a perfect, and just the idea of when thoughts are coming through your mind and you go to that place of I can't even meditate right. You beat yourself up. It's the act of showing your self-compassion that you hope becomes not a part of your meditating life, but a part of your awake life. That compassion that you eventually are conscientious of, that becomes a part of the fabric of your everyday. I mean, that is a tiny particle of it. For me, it also had to do with quietening my mind and giving myself that 30 minutes in the morning and that 30 minutes at night, to just be present and know that this is my time. I have the rest of my day to stress out over stuff, which hopefully, meditation helps with that as well. I just found that it really shifted my ability to hold things that felt like they were too heavy for me to hold.
Yeah. It was definitely has been my experience that the habitual practice of meditation, it shifts something in me so that I simply have a capacity I don't have otherwise apart from it. Mm-hmm. Namely, not to be taken captive by the swirling.
The ruminating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, and I tell my students that for me, at least, I got a lot better at trying to understand what was going on when I stopped thinking of it as a so-called spiritual practice and thought of it simply as like doing a push-up for my brain. Mm-hmm. And that when I just realized, okay, by doing it badly, we'll put in scare quotes, by doing it badly and saying, oh, I'm here I go again, and just say, yeah, there you go again. Yeah, there you go again. Note it, mm-hmm. How many ever times I have to. Then all of a sudden it was that intentionality of noting it, that was the gold, right?
Yeah.
Because then I could begin to kind of focus again in my normal everyday life rather than ruminating. I could say, yeah, there it goes, but I don't have to jump on that boat. It's an amazing practice.
It is an amazing practice, and I think it is a practice that I wish we had it in our schools, especially now. It also helps with sleep. Like I'll wake up in the middle of the night, and that period in the middle of the night when you wake up and you start going through, just every bad scenario, even that moment of being able to say, okay, noted. You know what? What are you going to do about it right now? You're not going to do anything, so you're going to let it go, like that cloud of thought that comes through your meditations. And when you wake up in the morning, it's not there. And that, I think, is the gift that you give yourself. And, I worked with David Lynch, his foundation, quite a lot. And some of the studies he did, even with kids, he worked in the Detroit school system that had a very, very high rate of dropout, high rate of kids who were had detention. And so that he could get federal funding, he needed to prove some data. And the data was unbelievable. What a difference it made for kids to slow down their reaction time, which is one of the great things about meditation, is that it does ultimately slow down the reaction time of reacting, and whether that's in violence or whether that's in judgment, whether that's in your response. And also it slows, I believe that it can slow time. Because when our endorphins are going, we're speeding through, not even noticing our moments in life.
Right.
So
yeah. Thank you for that. Do you have other regular practices and habits that help you maintain inner peace, sanity, some rightful ordering of yourself?
I have to run.
Oh, really?
Yes, I do, and I wish I loved a gym. I wish I loved yoga. But essentially, I want to run so that I can get away from people. You can't reach me. Yeah. And I'm out in nature. And I'm running through trees and I'm noticing things. That is my jam. Yeah. So, and I feel so much better if I go out and run a couple of miles. I'm sure my knees would love to have a little chit chat with me about it, but and my back, but I need that.
Yeah. At what point did you take seriously that as an artist you had to make some choices about whether you would or would not speak up about certain socio-political matters?
I really think that as a kid who grew up with Atticus Finch, basically, I had a very right-leaning dad. That was my lawyer dad, Wendell Crow, and I had a very liberal mom, Bernice. And I vividly remember getting ready to turn 18 and the two of them pulling me aside to kind of find out which way I was going to go because they canceled their votes out every election. But there was always talk in our household about current events. In fact, it's funny, we were not allowed to read at the dinner table, but my dad would hold court at the dinner table with Pudd'nhead Wilson or with, John Steinbeck. He would read to us.
At dinner?
Right after dinner. Like when we were little, he would read passages because he'd be in a book that he would just love and he'd be like, check this out, Ellery Queen. I mean,
Remarkable.
Suspense stuff, So my earliest, music was big, but literature was big. And so that was my early, I think, artistic roots. And then, I also read a lot of John Fonte and a lot of Bukowski and all that beat stuff, and was very much influenced by Dylan and by Crosby, Stills and Nash and people that were writing about what was happening. And, all that stuff that was political was getting played on the radio. War was getting played, and Buffalo Springfield. I mean, these were pop songs. Marvin Gaye, what's going on? These were songs that were very socio-political, and they were getting played at radio. And so to me, it just was, that's what you wrote about. You wrote about what you saw. You wrote about what you lived, what you experienced. And my first album, my second album, actually, I had read in the newspaper, which was still around back then. I used to get the New York Times Sunday delivered to my house, and would have my coffee on Sunday mornings and play music, and it's glorious. And I remember reading about a 14-year-old buying cop killer bullets at Walmart and killing a 12-year-old. And I wrote about it and named Walmart. It was a song called "Love Is a Good Thing." And it blew up. I mean, they wouldn't carry my record. They made a huge big stink about it. My record was banned. They said if I changed it to Kmart, they would carry my record. And
wow.
So it became like this big thing. And, for better or for worse, I think a lot of people knew about the record because of that, but also for worse, by that time, places like Walmart and Target, and they had bought up all mom and pop record stores. So those were the only places. So 60% of America could not buy my record because Walmart didn't carry it. So, I felt like, hell no, I'm not going to change it so that you're comfortable with the truth and so that I make more money. And I think that stance was just largely how I'd been brought up, Like hearing my dad say, no, you're not going to get to win this election because you figured out how to stuff the ballot box, And that, I think it was just, and it's always been a necessity for me. For me, music has been the place where I can make sense of the madness.
I mean, it's striking to me that to hear that story and to hear about the roots of that in your home. And it's almost as if my question was premised falsely, because I asked you, when did you make a decision? And you basically answered by saying, I didn't make a decision. I just do what I do. Yeah.
And I think, I think people who write songs that are inspired by situations that are hard, are not calculated. I think it is a part of them. I mean, I think people who write songs that are calling out uncomfortable situations feel driven to do that, and don't necessarily take it into account that this could blow up in your face. And were they to know that, would they not do it? And I think that the answer to that is, yeah, of course they would do it. Because I do think it's just a part of who you are. I mean, I think actually being an artist is a part of your overall experiences, you know?
Yeah. Sort of closing here, I must say that one of the highlights of, I certainly have not gotten to spend any amount of time on stage compared to the time of your life you spent on stage, but I do get to every now and then. And getting to sing Redemption Day with you at the Schermerhorn was certainly a highlight. And to sing Blowing in the Wind with you and Amy Grant was
oh my God, that was a big highlight. I love Amy. Amy's been for me. I'll tell you, it's been an interesting thing. I've had some moments that are not definable. And one of them was Redemption Day, because I came home from having visited Bosnia and Tuzla and playing for the troops, and came home and wrote this song, which is not at all how I write, like 7 stanzas, and recorded it, put it out. And what was interesting about it, Johnny Cash wanted to record it. And so I sang at June's wedding, and right after June's wedding, he called and said, I want to do this song. And he asked me all these questions about it, and he recorded it, and then he passed away. And so years later, I thought, I'm going to recreate the song. I called his son, and I called Roseanne and said, I want to recreate it for today, because I feel like it matters more now. So I did it with piano, and he sang it. We put him on it. He was already passed. We put his demo vocal on it, and I didn't want to put my voice on it. And the producer was like, you have to sing it. It's your record. And I was like, no, I don't want to write it. So I'm standing in the vocal booth one night, and I felt Johnny's presence. And I am not a woo-woo, but I felt his presence saying, pushing me, helping me find my way through it. It was such an odd thing. So to get to do that, every time I get to do it, I feel the blessing in it, that God thing, that I got so lucky to get to write that song. So
it's a powerful song. And yeah, I felt very special to get to sing Johnny Cash's part that night. And David Brooks, who was there with us that night,
amazing.
I had asked him if he would do the close right before we did Redemption Day. And I said, do you know that song? He said, I don't know the song. He said, but I'll make sure to listen to it before we do. And as you were about to do that night, do Redemption Day that night, he leaned over to me and he said, I did listen to it, and it's an incredible song.
Oh, so, yeah, that means a lot.
It's very powerful. Well, we've been talking to Sheryl Crow, 9-time Grammy Award winner, a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductee, and a lovely fellow Nashvilleian. Thank you, Sheryl.
Thank you, Lee.
It's been a delight. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Carrie Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Audrey Griffith, and Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.